What's up, everybody? You're listening to Salah's Corner with the one and only Salah Muhammad. I got into this weird debate on Instagram the other day, and it was about a topic. So the question was, the Pledge of Allegiance has "under God" in it, and the idea of our government is the separation of church and states. So should "under God" be removed from the Pledge of Allegiance? Now, I got into this huge debate with people on this topic. I had my opinions on essentially, yes, it should be removed if we are going to be a government that truly operates on the idea of the separation of church and state. But also that, pledging to the allegiance is kind of weird and we should consider getting rid of that as a whole. But going back to that initial point of, what do we consider the separation of church and states? And is it really and truly separate? I know a lot of political figures use that argument that church and state should be separate, but at the same time rely on religiosity to show that they are better than their political opponents. They are rightful and should indeed hold this political power, and that certain beliefs and ideas, should be upheld to essentially oppress other people. So on today's episode, I am sitting with Naomi Washington-Leapheart. She is a adjunct professor out of Villanova University. She also is a faith work minister. She is also queer and represents the LGBTQ community. And we had a conversation just about that and what it means to have quote-unquote religious freedom, how the government plays a role into that, and the decisions that have come along the way when it comes to this idea of what it means to be religious and righteous in America. So I've had a lot of people coming to me asking me where I find the time and the space to make all of these podcasts happen. Well, I have to thank the folks at Rec Philly. They provide me the space, the equipment, and the networking capacity to make this take off. And it's not just for other podcasts. Other creative individuals use this space as well. We're talking musicians, photographers, anyone that considers themselves a creative individual. So if that's you, head over to Rec Philly. Visit them on Instagram. And if you find yourself wanting a membership, tell them Salah sent you. How are you today?
I'm doing well.
Good. So just for all who are listening in, we crossed paths, and all thanks to Nicholas O'Rourke, and congratulations for him for making the ballot for independent candidate for city council. But we had a really good conversation about some of the work that you do. So just let's tell us about that.
So one of my jobs is as faith work director at the National LGBTQ Task Force. And the task force is actually the country's oldest LGBTQ policy organization. Wow. It's 45 years old. And the organization, one of the things I like to tell people is that the organization was founded by a group of folks, one of whom was a former priest who understood the importance of LGBTQ advocacy in faith communities. Right. Because much of the anti-LGBTQ sentiment is religious in nature. Right. And so the task force for a long time has valued doing faith work as part of its mission to change policy. And so I have been the faith work director for a little bit more than 3 years. And that means that I'm interested in talking to everyday people of faith, of all faith traditions, about what it means to create a world where LGBTQ people in particular can flourish. So that's everything from representing voices of faith on Capitol Hill. That means training congregations to be welcoming and inclusive to LGBTQ folks. That means preaching sermons that connect, for me, in the Christian tradition, the gospel, good news, to LGBTQ rights. That means speaking in public as a person who identifies as both black and woman and queer, and amplifying the story and the story of being living at the intersection of these identities. So it's really been a great opportunity for me to kind of sharpen my political chops, to learn about the legislation that directly impacts me and those I care about, and to, I think, be a public theologian, be a public faith leader who doesn't look like many public faith leaders, and try to represent a different kind of faith narrative in the public square.
I think back to, my limited education on politics and government, and through my upbringing in school and everything, and the common theme was separation of church and state. Obviously that is never been true. At the same time, I see almost that argument used as a weapon to not weigh in on religious matters when it is about the persecution of a sect of people, particularly in your situation, the LGBTQ community, but also to but you have to believe in something if you're going to be a political official. So that contradiction there has always, one, fascinated me, to those individuals who are using that idea of the separation of church and state to hold the head down of people who are suffering, but then also to say that you are not righteous and you're not worthy of even working in this government that's supposed to be for a separation of church and state, if you don't have some type of, if you're not a Christian, essentially.
Yeah, I think that one of the most powerful ways I've been able to participate in this work is by standing firmly in my Christian identity and critiquing sort of Christian supremacy, white Christian supremacy. That the presumption in this country is that the only way to be faithful is to be Christian.
Right.
And the only way to be Christian is to express faith through a kind of patriotic lens, right? The "in God we trust" as a nation, or "God bless America" and nobody else, right? And so I absolutely think that it's a myth, it's a lie, that church and state have been separated.
Yes.
And I'm not interested in condemning faith. I think people should bring all of who they are to the political moment, whether it's to the ballot box or to elected office or whatever. And I think that there has to be a responsible use of faith, a responsible expression of faith, particularly for public figures. Faith must do no harm first, right? To draw on that kind of theme from the medical profession. So it's been my joy to be a person of faith who critiques religious systems that use the state as an instrument, and to critique the state that anoints only some expressions of faith and not others. Right.
To do no harm, right? At how does one reconcile that? When as a government official, as a political figure, if you support or represent a policy that does harm, per se, how do you recognize that? How do you reconcile that as an individual who has a particular religious faith, where you are, one, supporting a policy that actually does do harm, but then at the same time, your religion isn't necessarily supposed to intercede with the policy and the government side of that,
Yeah, so I think that faith can't be an imposition. So my faith can be deeply important to me. The conclusions I've drawn as a result of my faith upbringing, my faith commitments, my faith teachings can be mine to shout from the top of the rooftops. But they cannot be, my positions, my conclusions, my judgments cannot be imposed on other people. And I think that, for me, is where the rubber meets the road. People saying, this is an expression of my faith, to actually pass laws that are imposing that faith onto other folks. So, for example, one of the things we've been working on for the last 2 years is to roll back the increased passage of religious exemption laws. These are state-based laws that allow people to claim a religious exemption to get out of following non-discrimination laws that are on the books, or in states that don't have non-discrimination laws to do whatever they want, free from state intervention or impunity as it relates to the state. So, for example, a registered nurse can say, it's against my religious belief, it's against my theological conclusions to terminate a pregnancy under any circumstances, even if it is what is medically advantageous for the person carrying the child,
right?
Person carrying the pregnancy. And so can refuse in many states to participate in any procedure that ultimately results in termination of pregnancy.
That's insane, first of all.
And so you've got people going to the hospital, receiving substandard care or no care, being turned away. They have no idea why, first of all. There's no sign on the door that says, people in this hospital reserve the right to refuse care based on religious conscience.
Wait, so they don't even have to disclose the fact that
that's right.
That's why there were, or make it known to you that that's why your care is being refused.
That's right. I tell the story all the time about Tamisha Means, who was a black woman who lives in Muskegon, Michigan, my home state of Michigan, who was 18 weeks pregnant and began to experience distress. And so she goes to her nearest hospital, which is called Mercy Health Partners Hospital. And the doctors quickly ascertained that her pregnancy is no longer viable. But they don't tell Tamisha. Because what is medically sound to do is to medically terminate the pregnancy. Because the pregnancy is no longer viable, and the longer the pregnancy stays inside of Tamisha's body, the more at risk Tamisha becomes. They give her essentially strong ibuprofen and send her home. She comes back 2 more times because she doesn't get better, she gets worse. Third time she comes back, she now is miscarrying.
That's insane.
She's hemorrhaging. They essentially let her miscarry, complete the miscarriage.
Wow.
Right? And so nobody said to her, we are a Catholic hospital, and we abide by a certain set of ethical directives that have been handed down, not from like the American Medical Association or somebody, but from the Catholic Church.
Right.
That prohibits us from doing these and such procedures, including termination of pregnancy.
Wow.
There wasn't like a rogue doctor who was like, listen, sis, you might want to go to the XYZ hospital,
right.
Or listen.
That's insane. So, I mean, she's basically, they basically made her suffer.
She suffered
longer than she needed to because of them imposing their religious beliefs onto her and how she lives her life.
Mixing their religious beliefs with best practices related to medical care.
That's insane.
Tamisha finds out later that this is the case and sues and loses. Because the courts say we can't intervene in religious matters because this is a private Catholic hospital.
Wow.
So that story isn't unique. And I think many folks, particularly poor, vulnerable folks, who don't have options when they get sick, are receiving substandard care, and they know they are, but they don't really have any recourse. They don't know why. And so we need to really, I think from a narrative perspective, do better about telling stories like Tamisha's, right?
Yeah.
And then from a policy perspective, we can't abide this, right?
I can only think of how many times I or other family members have gone to the hospital and you wonder, what type of care or what type of diagnosis did I not receive
right.
based on the individual belief of the people that work at this hospital or the individual person that's actually helping me,
right.
The doctor or nurse that's
right.
actually in the room with me.
I mean, we're already contending with discrimination by race, discrimination by gender,
right.
discrimination by class, and now we've got discrimination by faith.
Wow. That's insane.
Yeah.
That's actually insane. So like what's the recourse there? Like how do you fight that?
Mm-hmm. I think there's only so much that can be done on a political level, actually. I think because there are non-discrimination laws on the books in several states, and people simply claim an exemption so that they don't have to abide by the non-discrimination protection on the books. I mean, one recourse is to pass the Equality Act, which would federally add sexual orientation gender identity to the list of protected classes so that you could not be discriminated. It would be a federal lawsuit. I think it's a matter of shifting also our perceptions about what religious freedom is and what it gives us the right to do, and whether or not there's a hierarchy of rights. I mean, really what people are saying is my religious rights outweigh your civil rights.
Right.
Outweigh your right to health care, competent, complete health care. And so I think that one of the things that conservatives have been successful at doing over the last several years is shifting the narrative around religious freedom and framing this as a way to protect Christians, and only a particular kind of Christian, from persecution. Right? White Christians, usually cisgender male Christians, who are conservative in thought and in deed, who want to be protected from what they call persecution from the culture, not letting them be the Christians that they are.
Right. Because somehow you just living your life is stopping them from living theirs.
I mean, that to me is the theological question. Like, why is my faithfulness wrapped up in your life? My ability to be pious or faithful, I mean, and we could have a conversation about whether or not it's actually faithful, but according to them, it's a violation of my own devotion to serve you. What is that? Because as far as I knew, that faithfulness was a measure of individual grace, compassion, hospitality, justice seeking. It has nothing to do with what I'm doing over here, right? And who you think I am, and whether or not that's sinful and whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
I think of the case. I'm blanking on the specifics of it, but the wedding cake case, right?
Yes.
You know, from a, you know, we talked about the medical side. Let's talk about the private business owner, right? Correct me if I get this wrong, which I probably will. Gentleman goes to get a cake made for his wedding. He's a man. He's gay. And he's marrying another man. And the business owner basically says, that is infringing on my religious belief, and I'm not going to do this for you. This case goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. It was... I'll let you clarify the response, because I can't really make heads or tails of their response of it.
It's convoluted in many ways. Dave and Charlie, the couple, came into the cake shop together, to the bakery together with, I think it was Dave's mother, to buy this cake. And once Jack Phillips, the owner of the bakery, Masterpiece Cake Shop, understood that, oh, you two are the ones getting married, said, I'm not going to be able to make this cake, refuses to make the cake. Dave and Charlie then bring a claim to the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, which is, Pennsylvania has a Human Rights Commission, Philadelphia has a Human Rights Commission. So this is the body that decides whether or not non-discrimination laws have been violated.
Right.
Colorado has non-discrimination laws on the books. The commission decides that, yes, Jack Phillips discriminated against this couple. One of the commissioners says during the proceedings, we know that religion has been used to facilitate violence and wars. And I mean, just calling the role of religion as the catalyst for human suffering. In his, diatribe about why this was wrong.
Right.
Jack appeals. He lost and appealed. And that case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court basically made a non-decision. They said, well, we find fault with how the commission handled the case. So they didn't even
have an opinion.
They said that one commissioner who connected the dots between religion and violence throughout human history was behaving in a way that was hostile toward religious people or religion, and thus biased the proceedings. That's what they decided.
So telling the truth about some
this is what I'm saying. So
the reasons why we've gone to war, invaded countries, and persecuted large numbers of people is inflammatory to my faith.
Hostile.
That's insane.
That was what the word, it was hostile towards. And you have to be an objective, you have to do some objective analysis of what has happened. And that was beyond the scope of objectivity, according to the Supreme Court. So, many people are like, was this a win? Who was this a win for? I mean, basically, the Supreme Court could have put his foot down and said, discrimination in God's name is still discrimination, yada, yada. Right. But they chose to
kick the ball.
Kick it back to Colorado.
Yeah.
And that case got a lot of press and media, whatever. It's not the only case that the Supreme Court is considering related to religious freedom. And it certainly won't be the last case. Yeah. I think now that folk know the Supreme Court is hearing these kinds of things, folks are more apt to bring lawsuits and say that their religious conscience has been violated. So we were arguing, if you're a business owner who serves the public, you got to serve every member of the public.
Right.
You are not a Christian cake shop, a private, that's not what Jack Phillips is doing. But Jack was trying to argue, my cake making ability is a gift from God. It is an expression of my religious belief.
And that's an argument that a lot of people, particularly conservatives and on the right, hold that, this ability that was granted upon me by the hand of God does not allow me to serve you if you are infringing on my quote-unquote religious beliefs.
Right. But you're in business
to actually serve those
to
same
serve
people.
The public.
Right. Insane.
So that's where we are.
You said something about the Supreme Court, and they said it was highlighting those crimes in the name of religion was hostile. And I think of how in a related but unrelated way, individuals will have the same argument when it comes to racism, where if you call someone racist, you're the bad guy. Is that like a tactic, where that the right or conservatives are used to when they are the ones in the wrong, or when they're perceived to necessarily be in the wrong, and when you're being quote unquote called out, that the calling out is the wrong and not the actual action.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a tactic, and I think even more so, it's a general sentiment that we should all be able to be cool-headed and objective in conversations about the very humanity of other people. So that in the face of, if we're thinking about Jim Crow, in the face of dogs and fire hoses, I should be rational. I should be nice and polite, right? So it's a kind of the use of the, kind of this use and weaponizing of notions of civility.
Yeah.
That then shut down any progress, any movement, any conversation. And it delegitimizes, right, the very real sense of rage, anger that is present in vulnerable communities, right? So it's like, I'm supposed to tell you nicely to take your foot off my neck and not make you feel bad at all about having put your foot in my neck intentionally.
Right.
Yeah, it's a policing of tone, a policing of speech, policing of rage that then shuts down. Because smart people who deserve rights are nice.
Yeah. Yeah, they're supposed to be, at least.
Yeah,
and
they're
if you're
genteel,
not nice about it, then maybe that's why you were
right.
Maybe that's why we were racist against you, because you weren't nice about it.
Right.
When you say it like that, it's obviously it's obviously insane, but it works.
Yeah.
It works tremendously well.
Yeah.
You know, the call for civility in the instances of oppression. And it's like, do you go into the middle of a battlefield and say, you know, after you've just shot the other, you know, your opponent or the individuals you're fighting against, and say, okay, I'm going to be nice now. Like, you can't shoot me back. You can't get mad at me back. Like, it's just such an insane stance that works time and time and time again. That I don't, you know, how do you recommend addressing that?
You know, on the one,
not
the
to say you have to follow
the
answers.
The first thing I would say is people who are oppressed need to remember that actually doesn't work. I think a lot of folks do fall for the okie doke, like we got to go in and be rational and be clear and let's send our most level-headed folks in. And, you know, we've fallen for the myth that respectability is successful. And it only is successful in sort of emptying us of our passion and our legitimate feelings of rage and despair and all of the things. And so that's what's top of mind for me. Like, what is the good news for folks who are oppressed so that we can keep on demanding what we deserve as human beings? And then I think there is a way that I think this is all nestled in a container related to religion, right? We've said, Jesus said, turn the other cheek. We've said, Jesus said, love your enemies and pray for the people who persecute you. I mean, this is Bible.
Right.
And so I think it's coated in a kind of thin layer of religiosity, right? That Jesus never shot nobody, or Jesus never picked up a bullhorn, right? And so it's on then people of faith, and particularly Christian people of faith who have promoted this kind of narrative, to roll back some of that and say that anger is part of, you know, the full range of human expression. Yeah. And so stop making it profane, right? There is holiness in anger. Let's point to the examples from the Bible, since we're going to quote the Bible. Let's point to examples of Jesus being fed up, or Jesus, you know, somebody clapping back at Jesus and Jesus having to say, oh, you're right. You know, that's in there too, right? Or Jesus refusing to answer to the state when the state was falsely accusing Jesus of stuff Jesus hadn't done. And Jesus was like, I don't owe you no explanation, right? And so bringing forward those narratives so that it doesn't get coded in, you know, holiness, to be passive, to be genteel, to be civil in the face of insanity.
So taking that back from those who use the guise of religiosity as a weapon to those who they are oppressing.
Yes. This is the way God would have it. I mean, if the world is organized, how it's organized. Right. And
not we organized it this way to oppress you.
Yes.
Yeah. This is just a natural law and order of things.
Yes.
In God's way. I have my extreme views on, like, I have to do a better job of not saying that, because I don't actually think it's an extreme view of the existence of conservatism and the experiment of conservatism and the Republican Party should end, you know, because the success of it means the oppression of other people in a sense. And it's finding the different tools, like you said, to start to dismantle the hierarchy that they've established. Because, you know, the majority of people today aren't conservative. You know, the majority of people today don't represent what the Republican Party is and does. But they are successful with the argument, and they've built this foundation over decades and decades of quote-unquote civility, of quote-unquote, you know, religious freedom and rights. And so there's light, I guess, at the end of the tunnel, in the sense of, like, you know, the next generations coming after us are not even close to conservatism and kind of the era that we're in and has come before us. But, you know, I know a lot of people feel like it's worse now than it's ever been before.
Yeah, I think in addition to I think the wild success can also be attributed to a vigilance. I think that progressives take for granted the extent to which, no, human beings left to our own devices are selfish and violent.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's a theological statement I'm making, that I'm not suggesting that we are not good fundamentally,
right.
But what I'm saying is, unchecked, isolated, being outside of relationship and community, we are selfish and violent.
Right.
And so conservatives know one win is only one win. We can't rest on our laurel. We must always be working, always be strategizing, always be constructing the new playbook to preserve what we've done, our victories. And I think that progressive folks don't do that well.
Yeah.
We celebrate.
And then forget.
I mean, I'm not saying the celebration isn't important, but it means that we aren't vigilant.
Yeah.
We think we got it.
Yeah.
We secured. Didn't we do that? We had the Civil Rights Act. Didn't we do that? We said we couldn't discriminate. We got that check, And I really just think that human history has taught us that stuff just comes back around again. It goes by another name. It looks differently. It morphs. It evolves. But it'll come back.
Yeah.
If we're not vigilant to protect what we've won, what we've secured. And so I would hope that this last 2 years or whatever it's been, 4 years, has shown us that everything that we have built can be ripped down with the flick of a pen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we need not think that we've arrived. And justice is not a destination. Justice is a way of living, a way of being. And so I think that we continue to find ourselves on the defensive because we forget that. We take for granted that that's true.
I have one final question that I ask everyone, and it's what's your most favorite thing in the world right now?
Oh my goodness!
Very random, but a way of kind of recapping what we do.
Wow! Oh my goodness! Can I say two things?
Sure.
Okay, so the other thing I do part-time is teach theology and also Africana Studies and Peace and Justice Studies at Villanova University. Done this since the spring of 2017. It is really the joy of my life, my kind of vocational professional life, because I try to create classrooms where no question is off limits, where critique and doubt and suspicion are common, expected, normal. Where faithfulness is kind of a wrestling match as opposed to a gold star or whatever.
Right.
And so I teach a class called Do Black Lives Matter to God, which really brings together all of my questions and interests, right? If God is good and if God is powerful and God is on the side of the oppressed, all of which have been said, what is going on?
Right.
Particularly
what's the deal
related
with us?
to black folks,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And we, at the end of the semester, put God on trial. So we've read all this material and we had all these conversations and we've done some writing and we turned the classroom into a courtroom. And there are folks who are arguing for the defense of God, who are arguing for the prosecution of God. We have witnesses who are all black folk. The students kind of embody, say like Nat Turner or say Henrietta Lacks or say, these people. And we put God on trial. And I've done this now 3 times. It's amazing to me how, first of all, hesitant people are to make God accountable for what has happened, particularly to black folk. So that's just it. People who believe in God and people who don't believe in God are like, wait a minute, are we supposed to be doing this? Like, waiting on lightning to strike or whatever. And I love the discomfort that this creates for folks. And so it really makes me happy to create a space where for 14 weeks we can at least ask that hard question. And students have no idea at the end of the semester. I mean, they come in like, of course Black Lives Matter to God. And then at the end, people are like...
Damn, I don't know. Yeah.
I want to say but then next semester I'm going to be teaching it at what's formerly Greaterford, now Phoenix, SEI Phoenix Prison. I'm teaching that course. And so I'm just delighted to know that I'm going to learn so much in this kind of theological reflection from folks who are living in incarceration. That question, I just can't wait to teach this course.
Yeah, that actually sounds exciting.
It gives me so much joy to do that work. And then I think the second thing is probably this music making. I was telling you about the fact that I'm a part of a choir called the Philadelphia Threshold Singers. It's a choir that sings at the thresholds of life. So the most frequent threshold that we are present for is the threshold between life and death.
Right.
So we sing for hospice patients who are dying. Sometimes their family members are there, so we sing for them as well. And we just sing kind of soft, kind, comforting songs to send someone on. So we sing things like, "You can rest now.
That's beautiful.
Thank you for what you've given. Now is your time to rest." I mean, can you imagine?
Right.
And it's just a real joy. I've been in ministry for several years now and have been a pastor and, working in politics. And this feels like the most, I don't want to say the most fulfilling ministry that I do, but it's certainly the most impactful in a short amount of time. Like we spend 2 hours at the hospice, and I'm really clear about what matters.
A friend of mine, Carlos, who hosts a podcast as well, we talked about, he does a lot of volunteer work, and we talked about that, we're in the age of the instant gratification when it comes to social media, and then that volunteering and, doing those types of actions, that instant gratification is, you can't match that. There is a certain satisfaction that you obviously are providing for those people that are in your hospice care, but also, that does something for you that you may not necessarily realize going into it, that is just very rewarding coming out of it. So that's beautiful. Thank you. Naomi Washington-Leapheart, thank you. Adjunct professor for Villanova. I'm trying to remember all of your titles.
Faith Work Director at the LGBTQ Task Force.
Thank you for sitting with me today. This conversation was great.
This was great. Thank you.
Thank you again to Naomi for coming in and sitting with me on the podcast. This idea of I can infringe upon someone else's civil rights because of my religious rights is kind of insane, but it's an argument that conservatism and the right has held for a very, very long time. And it really infringes on our ability to have a robust conversation on what it means to have actual separation of church and state, what it means to have religious freedom, and what it means to have civil rights all at the same time. We can't have these conversations about the three if we demonize those individuals in the midst of those conversations. So thank you again to Naomi for sitting with me on the podcast today. If you have any questions, feel free to always email me at realtalk@salazcorner.com. Salaz Corner is recorded out of Rec Philly. It's a space for creative individuals. It's produced by producer extraordinaire Bree Wilson and features music from Prod by Delgado. For more of my work and to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, please visit me at salazcorner.com. Until next time, peace, y'all.